Hey everybody, welcome to Watches with Dennis. And it's been a little while since I had much of a video out, so I figured I'd try and work in a live stream. But I struggled with what sort of topic to cover because, in terms of new watch releases, post Watches and Wonders, there hasn't really been anything that caught my eye very much. I guess there was a new Polo watch at 36 millimeters that I thought about maybe talking about, but it was basically the same thing as before, but smaller and without, I guess, gems for the indices. So it wasn't, it wasn't enough to motivate me, even though I thought the watch looks perfectly reasonable. So instead, I thought, since we're a few weeks removed now from Watches and Wonders, it would probably be a decent enough time, I figure, to go ahead and have a conversation about what quote unquote won Watches and Wonders. We had a live stream. I had a few guests on as the last live stream, in fact, where we talked about a lot of the releases that Watches and Wonders had, especially watches that I didn't do sort of first thoughts videos on, taking footage from the companies, my usual sort of first thoughts fair use items of here's some renders and stuff that the companies have put out. What do we think about them? Or at least what do I think about them? And then you all share your thoughts in the comments about what you guys think. So today I thought, okay, we've got a few weeks distance. Let's go ahead and have a bit of a conversation about what we do with everything. We as people, in my opinion, do with everything, which is we got to pick winners and losers, or at least we'll be optimistic and we'll say we'll pick winners. So coming out of it, a lot of different companies, I should say, a lot of different media sites have, and I've included links in the description to three of them. I've got information from Rob Report, I got information from Hodinky, and I've got information from Wrist Enthusiast. So you can go and follow those links. And I did those just so you could, if you were curious about Watches and Wonders, didn't follow it very closely, for example, to have something to be able to go and explore in terms of which watches people thought were best. But I wanted to do this a little bit differently than focusing on the watch, and instead talk more about brands and which brands have done the best out of Watches and Wonders. Now, in order to make it a little more interesting for those who are watching live, there is a live stream poll. I put it up before the video went live. Actually, I had two different versions of it. So originally, my hope was to actually let you pick specific brands in the poll. Here's the problem with YouTube live polling, though. There's a limit of 4 options that you can have to choose from. And there are just way too many brands available for that to be remotely viable, in my opinion. So my original plan, I did try and do it. So I created, but no one voted in it. I ended the poll well before the video live stream was active. And it's like, well, what am I gonna do? So I was gonna say, well, what are the biggest brands, biggest brands that were at Watches and Wonders? So the poll had Patek, Rolex, Tudor, and option 4 was something else or someone else. And I was like, that was my response. I was thinking, I don't, most of the online discussion hasn't been about the Patek releases. So I kind of felt that was almost a throwaway option to present to you all. And then it's like, there's so many others. Like, okay, so Rolex had a lot of stuff and Tudor had a lot of stuff, but so did Zenith, so did Cartier, so did JLC. And so I felt like something else was being way too broad. And hey, Neff, I'm glad you were actually able to make it as well. I hope you enjoy the live stream. So now there is a different live stream option for all of you who are coming in, and I'll keep it up until the end of the stream, and then I'll announce the results. But I decided, because brand was just too limiting with how YouTube polling works, I wanted to go ahead and do by like conglomerate. So even though we're going to be discussing which brand won Watches and Wonders as a video topic, for poll purposes, I went ahead and called them collectives or major conglomerates. And that gets a little weird because Rolex is like an independent. So, but they're a big one. So for those that are not actually able to vote or are watching this as a recording, and hey, respectably, you're not late. You're respectably like on time. If that was your goal. But welcome, Australia, huh? So I'm in Kansas, so opposite side of the world and smack dab in the middle of the United States. So your polling options are, people can't see the live stream polls when they watch the replay. That's why I have to describe them. So your collective options are Rolex / Tudor, because they're the same company, sort of independent nonprofit, controls both of those. Then LVMH is an option, and LVMH, there are three main watch brands, but they were all at Watches and Wonders. So that's Tag Heuer, Zenith, and Hublot. Those are all under LVMH group. And then Richemont is your third choice, and the fourth option is someone else. So Richemont, for those that aren't familiar, Richemont's got a lot of stuff that was at Watches and Wonders. So in the poll, I know I've given examples of IWC, JLC, Vacheron Constantin, and Cartier because that's about all I could fit before I ran out of text space. But in terms of some other Richemont brands that are pretty big, A. Lange & Söhne, obviously they had that big Odysseus release at Watches and Wonders. Roger Dubuis, Piaget, Panerai is a Richemont group brand. I'm cheating. I'm looking at a list. Mont Blanc is probably the other big one that I know was at Watches and Wonders under that brand. Now, normally there would be another really big group that we would list when we're doing this sort of discussion, and that would be Swatch Group, right? Omega, Glashütte, Regional, Arnold and Son, Breguet. But Swatch Group doesn't participate in Watches and Wonders. So they saved us a big one. And then, of course, if we move outside of this sort of big European conglomerates, there would be the Seiko group, which, of course, Orient, Seiko, Grand Seiko, Creedor. And Grand Seiko was at Watches and Wonders, so I don't want to dismiss them. But obviously, when I'm thinking conglomerates, they just don't represent enough brands versus these other ones that I ended up having to name. Oh, Nashville, doing the music tour. I mean, they've got a big, obviously they're well known for the Grand Ole Opry and country, but Nashville has a very storied music scene that I think extends really beyond that. I have not been to Nashville myself, so I don't get to experience that. But here nearby Kansas City, big history with jazz. So we have our own music claim. But anyway, so that's sort of the context of that poll. But I want to go ahead and do a little bit of discussion on that. Now, as I noted in the video description, I've linked where people were picking watches. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because I think it makes more sense to go ahead and read the articles. So I'm just going to, obviously, I'm going to keep it a little small, but just to run through some of the things that other people that cover watches have been talking about. This is from the Rob report. So they named the Reverso 1 out of JLC was a pick of theirs. The self-winding 34 millimeter Vacheron overseas was one that they picked. This one, it might show up on another list. This is one that I liked a lot, though, is the Parmigiani. This is the Radaponte minute repeater that they put out. They actually had more than that one release. I see respectively late says huge country music fan, and of course a watch fan because you're here on this channel. Black Bay 54, of course, that one's going to be a big one worth discussing. This is one that's interesting. I want to touch on this in a little bit, but again, I'm not going to focus a lot on what these other people are picking. I want to have a conversation. So the IWC Engineer, that's been one that's gotten a lot of talk, not all positive either. That's why I think it's so interesting. They picked the Dippin' Dots Oyster Perpetual. And then the Chronograph JLC, we talked about that on the last live stream. That one was, I think, very impressive to a lot of people that got to look at it. They picked a Jacob & Co. Casino watch. I have no idea why they would, but again, my tastes don't necessarily align with all of these editors. And then the Rolex 1908, which I put out a standalone video, I think after the live stream, because I wanted to compare it to some other Calatrava style watches, because that's what I think it's trying to compete with. So that's the Rob Report items that they named as specific watches. Again, we're going to talk more about brands, but looking at wrist enthusiasts, they had a few different picks. So the Kermit Oris, which we talked about on the last live stream, that's gotten a lot of attention as a really quote unquote fun watch. Titanium Master, that might be arguably the biggest Rolex release that came out of Watches and Wonders, but that is very debatable. Here again, we see the IWC Engineer. Igeneer, so excuse me, I'm probably mispronouncing that both ways. Here's a shocker that I don't think shows up on any other list, the Billionaire out of Jacob & Company, which I personally do not like in any way, shape, or form, but hey, it was picked as a favorite from some. What is this one here? Roger Dubuis got a split-second chronograph. I'm not big on skeleton dials, but Roger Dubuis always gets a lot of attention. Of course, the Platinum Rolex Daytona, all the Daytonas were revamped, but the Platinum is the one with the display case back. So that was one. Here again, Black Bay 54. I don't think that's in any way surprising. Chopard Alpine Eagle, that's a personal favorite of mine. That ended up on the watch, the wrist enthusiast list here. And another favorite for a lot of people, the Odysseus chronograph that A. Lange & Söhne put out. They also named the Carrera Glass Box as an interesting watch that they thought was really impressive out of the show. Here again, the Rolex 1908 has shown up. Cartier, they weren't on the last list from Rob Report, but the Santos Dumont Micro Rotor collection, I guess the whole collection, and also the green one, which I think we spoke about on the live stream a couple of weeks ago on this channel. U-boats, oil filled watches. These are the vintage BR curves. Here again is the Parmigiani Rattrapante Tonda line. And Patek. Okay, so Patek got an Aquanaut here that showed up, and Pilot from Zenith. I know the Pilots have been a little polarizing. This is the flyback chronograph version. And what is this? Mont Blanc. This is their Minerva. All the Minerva ones are the really fancy stuff that comes out of Mont Blanc from the Minerva factory. And then Bulgari's Octo Roma Chrono. Wow, they did a lot of these watches. You could tell I didn't read all of this ahead of time. I just grabbed a few that I knew were naming some of their favorites. Grand Seiko's hand engraved. This is a limited edition though, but it's a Grand Seiko. It looks cool. So there's that. And then the last one in the links that you'll be able to go and read about, because I'm just showing you real quick pictures on these, is this is Hodinkie's picks. So again, the Odysseus. So I think the Odysseus chronograph, that might be the watch that showed up. I don't know if it's the only watch that showed up on all three. A different Cartier, the Privé Normal. Here, Black Bay. This is the original Black Bay 41 millimeter sizing, though I think it's thinner now. This is the one with the burgundy bezel. We did talk about that on our live stream. Cartier Baganoir, I don't know French. Baganoir. I've never seen this one listed before, but that made an appearance there. This is another Chopard that came up on the live stream that some people really like, the more dressy version, the LUC 1860. Very cool dial on that one. Picture's too small to really see that well here. GMT Master 2, the gold one from Rolex, of course. Parmigiani, different one though, another Tonda, but this one's the split seconds chronograph that they came out with. I actually don't like that one visually as much, but it's still a very impressive watch. Here's one that showed up in all three lists. The Tudor Black Bay 54. What is this? The Carnelian dial Rolex. This is the first for it to show. This is the day date. And so those were the Hodinkee picks. So, but we have all these brands that were actually at Watches and Wonders. So those are just three different groups in terms of what they were sort of picking. So quickly catching up on chat, because I see more and more people have come in as I've been vamping here to buy some time. Neff noting that the Chopard and the 1860 were, in his view, the best watches in show. Respectively, late notes. Watched a number of videos and regarding feedback from here. Let me put my head above the chat, or I don't need to show the other thing here right now. But many choices were either beyond theirs and other people's budgets, and also likely unavailable. But loved the Tudor releases, perhaps because they're already into Tudor. And yeah, that's an interesting thing as well. We do end up talking a lot about watches that are basically unobtainable, either because of price or because of true scarcity. And that's an interesting thing when we talk watches. And I talk a lot of watches, a lot of times that are well beyond my price point. So it's an interesting hobby. But the nice thing is there's a lot of stuff that's really, really approachable. As many of you have seen me before, have heard me, because it's another hobby of mine. And you can see the play field on the back wall here. Pinball is another one of my hobbies, and watches is interesting because you can get into watches a lot easier dollar-wise than you can pinball, but it also maxes out way higher than pinball ever gets. So it's just an interesting juxtaposition for me. So respectably has a burgundy smiley heritage. And, I'm wondering if those are going to be a lot more collectible now that the smileys are more and more discontinued. I think at this point, all the Black Bay versions are out. But you can still get smileys in the 1926 line. So that's why I say, it seems like they're phasing out, but I don't know if they're going to go totally in-house or not. I think so. I think that's their ultimate goal, but I'm not quite certain yet. Neff noting he's got the Smiley Black Bay 36, which I think is a really nice classic looking watch. Welcome, Obese Tuna. Makes a lot of the live streams, so I appreciate it. Neff likes the 1860. Of course, he mentioned it earlier in the chat. And then a Zen, which is Zen 104. And Zen actually had a couple of releases that came out. They're not at Watches and Wonders. They actually show up to Time to Watches is what I think. Maybe it's because of the translation. But Time to Watches is an event that happens in Switzerland at the same time as Watches and Wonders. In fact, it happens in Geneva. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up the Zen site, actually, because I think of their new watches. It was the T50s here that they showed off. These two actually, maybe some other flavors of it as well. But the new T50 and the GBDR, those were actually at Time to Watches. And I thought about doing a video on Time to Watches. I did cover some of the releases in 2022 as a video, but most of the brands that are at Time to Watches I've never heard of, quite frankly. In fact, there are only two that I know of, Zen and Yema. And I don't know that Yema had a new release at Time to Watches. This was actually unveiled before Time to Watches started, but it was the watch they were showing off, because I did hear some, I think it was maybe on the Blog to Watch podcast, might have been a different podcast. But they did bring up that they got to have some hands-on time with the new T50s out of Zen, that they were at Time to Watches. So they had walked over and participated in some of that show. So it's not all just Watches and Wonders. I think there are actually even more than Time to Watches as events that go on simultaneously. It's a whole big shindig, but those are the two I know of, is Watches and Wonders, which is what everyone talks about. But there is Time to Watches, and they have their own website. So if you ever want to explore what happened with Time to Watches, it's probably worth looking at. I might see if I can pull up the site here, because I have visited it recently. So let me see if I can get you a share here. So, okay, they're already promoting the 2024 stuff. But so you see, it did have a few thousand people that went, and I was in terms of the brands, I'll load them up here because some of you all might be able to recognize some of them. But it is interesting. So, okay, I have heard of more than the two I named. Those were the two biggest names. So, like, I've heard of Reservoir before, but a lot of these, what is this, Cuervo? I've heard of Cuervo and Sobrinos before as well. So, I've misrepresented my knowledge of brands, but there are a lot here that I do not know. But you see, Yema not having a picture, I think that I'm not sure they were an exhibitor per se, or there weren't any details on the site highlighting some new watch of theirs. But there are some interesting concepts that show up at Time to Watches. So just as an FYI, it's just simply timetowatches.com. It might be worth your time. If you get a chance and you want to browse the web at some point, go ahead and check them out. I'm laughing because of Obese's comment, time to spend your money. But indeed, this is true for any of the shows that we might cover, because they all want to take a big bite out of our wallet. So it's very, very interesting. And I see respectfully notes, nice value and available, and also own two Yema, the Rallygraph and the Spacecraft. I have never owned a Yema. I've never owned a Zen. I do kind of like those T50s. Zen's most popular watches, design-wise, have never resonated with me. Like the utilitarian style that they go with isn't the utilitarian style that I like, because I do like simple designs. But I've only heard very good things about how rugged and durable they are. So if you're truly looking for a tool watch, Zen is definitely a brand that I would put at the top of the list, simply based off of the trusted people that I have heard give them very positive reviews. But I myself have not owned one. And I guess I didn't do a risk check. I don't normally do them on videos. I do try on live stream. So I am wearing my the Oris. The Kermit had inspired me to finally pull the trigger on a used one. I liked the Pro Pilot, other than the name Pro Pilot, because these Pro Pilot X's these are not pilot watches with how these dials are designed. They do not have easy to read Arabic numerals. They have no pilot tools on them. They're not Fliegers. I don't know why they're called pilot watches, other than that was the line originally. And the bracelet looks like a seatbelt. But I've had this about a week now. I'll probably get a video. I've not done the video yet. I actually shot some B-roll for it, my review video. I'll probably do that tomorrow or Thursday, is my plan, to get it out before Friday. But we'll see. I have a job, and I got work stuff. So I have to see if I can work in doing the A-roll stuff, which is the bulk of the work. I haven't written the script, because I script my reviews before I do them. But anyway, so that's the next watch that I'm going to do. And then for those that, because I talked about it, but I didn't have a review out, for those that were curious, my Longa, I have heard back. I bought that through Watchbox. It wasn't keeping accurate time. It ended up having to go back to Longa for servicing. So that's all under warranty, which is why I bought it through a used dealer, as part of the reason I like to do that. So they did write back to me, and said everything's going to go according to plan, and I should next hear from them to get a estimated time to get it back. So, but it's being serviced under warranty. So that's what's happened with that. So just, it was like gaining 90 seconds a day, and its amplitude was low. It clearly needed a service. and apparently they weren't comfortable doing it themselves, or they don't service the longas and they just do it through longas. So whatever works. But so yeah, the gray, it was interesting. So the gray is like the most boring one, and I like very boring watches for certain, like dive watches. I go more fun, like I like more color. Pilot watches and stuff. Like I have one other quote unquote pilot watch, a true pilot watch. I have a Stova Flieger. Of course, it's a very boring design. It is the Type B, which is more visually interesting, but still a very utilitarian watch. Um, it's the date window, I think, that really made me go with the gray the most. Of course, it matches really well with the titanium. This is my first titanium watch. It's still really weird to me to wear something this light with a bracelet. It's a very interesting experience. Um, but I do like the blue a lot. It's just the white date window kind of irks me with it. It's the same thing I had with the Aquaterras, those new colorful ones that came out from Omega, and they didn't color match the date windows. This is not a color match date window; it's black, but it matches the indices really well. And yes, the white date window matches the white indices on the blue one, or on at least the salmon one. The problem with the salmon one is I wasn't, and same with the Kermit. It's such a bright dial. I don't know if I can easily read the markers. This uses black lume as well, which is interesting. You'll see it in the review, but the lume, and I was warned about this ahead of time, so I knew it. But it's it's just to look cool in the daylight. This lume is terrible. It is probably the worst lume I have ever seen in terms of. It's like whatever they do to make it black totally takes away the ability for it to glow for any period of time. So you do not get the gray iteration of the. I hear the other ones glow a lot better. Do not get the gray one if you actually want a nighttime telling watch, because it is not going to meet your needs. But that'll be noted in the review. But back to the subject du jour tonight. So which brand sort of won Watches and Wonders? Now, I think the first thing we do need to quickly do is just go over which brands were at Watches and Wonders. I think we all have, most of us who are watching live at least, and probably those who have come in after the fact, do have a sense of already which ones have been talked about. So we already, and again, that's why I quickly ran through that whole wrist enthusiast, Hodinkee, Rob report, sort of the ones linked in the description to give you guys some sense of the specific watches that people are talking about. But of course, many of these companies came in with more than one watch that they revealed. And so I don't want to pick a winner watch. I want to pick a winner brand, because we have to kind of take it all as a whole. And do we count bad releases against a company? Do we just count up how many had really good releases? Does one excellent release sort of outweigh everything else? And we all have our own judgments on that. But so really quickly, you can see the list here on the watch companies that were at Watches and Wonders. Now, a lot of these I've not seen anyone talking about, like Alpina, Chanel. And that's not to say I haven't seen anything on them. It's just those watches aren't showing up in anyone's lists that I've seen. So a lot of these companies are just not going to, I think, really be in the running, like Chrono Swiss, not in the running. Whereas Chapek and Chopard, a lot of people are giving attention to those watches that they had. I see people talk about the JLC releases and the Cartier releases more than they've been talking about Louis Monet's release, or what we saw out of Frederic Constant. So that's kind of what I mean there. So, I mean, again, if we're focusing in on the groups that I have in the live poll, the conglomerate groups, so Rolex, Tudor, Richemont's brands, and LVMH's brands, I would probably initially go ahead and say, let's rule out LVMH. So LVMH, to my knowledge, they have three main brands, and those brands were all at Watches and Wonders. So that's Zenith, Hublot, and Tag. And I've heard okay things about all of those three brands, actually. Like some people have really found that the Big Bang Hublot that was actually there was quite wearable, was pretty nice. And setting aside Hublot's reputation, sounds like it was a pretty decent watch. Zenith, I've heard mixed things on the Pilot releases. Some people don't like what they've done with the new Pilot releases compared to the already existing Pilot line of watches, and some of the changes that were made. Some people do think they're a relatively handsome watch. More positive about the new Zenith Defy stuff that was shown. So Zenith Defy higher up than the Zenith Pilot is how I'm kind of ranking it. But to me, none of it really stood out enough to like make it a winner, right? It's something like I'd probably go and look again at the Zenith Defy using the El Primero movement to do something kind of fun with the seconds, what we call the seconds hand, the small seconds. It's kind of neat. Like I might consider it on sale, but it's not a watch that really spoke to me. So kind of ruling that one out. And then tag. Some people, again, we did see in one of the lists, the Carrera has gotten some attention out of tag. And I know some of the other things, some people have been like, tag's kind of making some smart moves here on some of the things they do. I know they had a gym set iteration of a tag that some people thought was really well implemented. But that being said, again, it's just not been a big part of a lot of the conversation that I've been hearing. And from what I've seen, and we can always load up any of these if we need to from the Watches and Wonder site or from the websites themselves, but none of those tags are speaking to me either. So in terms of me doing all the talking today, I'm not leaning towards anything out of LVMH as being a winner. I didn't hear that they did anything disastrous, but that it was a relatively safe series of releases out of the conglomerate. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I think maybe with Neff, this point about Rolex and Tudor is probably the next one to start with, right? Because they're kind of an independent nonprofit, but there's so much of the market share, right? Rolex alone is 25% of the Swiss watch market in terms of market capitalization. Tudor is no slouch in that regard either, and they've clearly made tremendous gains ever since they got back on the scene in the US in 2012. And so they've got a lot going for them, and noting like things like Chopard with that awesome release that they had, a couple awesome releases. I think we could really argue because it depends where you're coming from. I know a lot of people really love the 1860. That's Neff's favorite, and the 1860 is a beautiful dress watch. Actually, let me go ahead and throw it up on the screen here, just because I don't think we're going to spend a lot of time talking about Chopard, but I think Chopard had two really good winners of watches. So I just don't think volume wise there are enough to quote unquote win the show. So I feel I have to rule them out. The 1860 is a beautiful dress watch. I personally was really impressed by the Alpine Eagle 41 XPS. That's my favorite release of theirs. There are elements of both of these that I really like, but they're both really great watches. I don't care as much about the rest of their releases, but these two releases I think are really good releases. And so definitely want to say Chopard. If I was to pick a surprise from Watches and Wonders, I did not go in expecting that Chopard would impress me at all. I've always thought that the Alpine Eagle was a nice, clean looking watch. Interesting, different enough of an integrated bracelet that it didn't feel derivative to me. I know others feel differently, and that's fine, but never been one that's been on my radar. This one is, the XPS is, and the 1860 probably would be if I didn't have the Longa already. And I also have a Reverso, so I don't want to be in the market for more dress watches. Easier. That's what we all say, right? We're done with something. But for now, I'm done on dress watches. So I'm trying not to look at that 1860 too much, because that dial is really interesting. And I like a lot about what they did with it. But so back to Rolex though, Rolex and Tudor, right? I mean, volume wise, setting aside like the production levels. So Rolex, right? Titanium Yachtmaster. Rolex is usually, ever since I've been in this hobby, and I've not been in the hobby long, right? I mean, I got my first luxury watch like 15 years ago, but I didn't start collecting until 2020. So, normally ever since I've been following these events, these Watches and Wonders events, because I got in around when Watches and Wonders started, Rolex has always been really lame in my opinion. I like the brand, but like their Watches and Wonders stuff, like here's the 50th anniversary of the Explorer 2. Let's do nothing. It's like they've been so conservative on the releases as to be extremely boring to me. And in a way, boring is good because it's safe, but it also means you don't win shows because you changed one part of the font on the label of the chapter ring. But this year, totally different. So we knew that we highly suspected there would be the redesigned Daytonas, right? We got those. Reaction to those is mixed. Some people don't like that the Platinum Daytona has a display case back. I thought that was kind of cool. Some people don't like the changes on the dial of the Daytonas. I'm mixed on it. Like, I think as I've looked at them more, I like the old format of the thicker lines around the sub registers, the sub dials. So I liked the older version on that, but I do like that they went back to the more El Primero movement style indices. I think that looks better on the Daytonas. The new movement, I think, can't be debated. The new movement is, as it often is with a Rolex improvement, is superior to the old movement. So the new movements are better. So good on them finally updating the Daytona movements. Um, but overall, I think it's been relatively positive, especially because there are multiple looks to them. But setting that one aside, the the release of the titanium Yachtmaster, I think, was a definite surprise. I don't think very many people thought Rolex was going to come out this year with a titanium watch, much less a titanium watch that was in a relatively popular model. Like they did their experiment. It was just last year they did that ultra deep, super humongous, no human being. Well, there are some human beings, but no human being like me would be able to wear that in any sort of capacity without actually like diving with it. Because in any other instance, it would look ridiculous. And then putting it into the Yachtmaster. Yes, the Yachtmaster is not one of their top tier lines, but it's very Submariner looking, and I it makes sense. It makes sense, but I think it was very surprising for people. So that was a big move on their part. Of course, they've got some new date and date just looking dials designs that are interesting and neat. They do have a couple of controversial ones. The Dippin' Dots perpetual. I found more people who seem to like it than hate it, but I know a lot of people kind of laugh at it. The day date with the emojis, far more polarizing. I'd say more skewing negative than anything, simply because all of the functions on the watch, other than the time telling, are completely impractical. So I think a lot of people, at best, will say, okay, well, Rolex is showing that it can have fun. And at worst is saying they made a ridiculously overpriced watch that functionally has no business being in the Rolex catalog. But it's different. And so in that regard, I want to give Rolex a lot of kudos because they've always been extremely predictable. And I think they did a couple big moves, the titanium Yachtmaster and that emoji thing definitely weren't expected. So I want to catch up on chat real quick. Respectably Late says, thought the disappearance of the Cellini was a bit of a surprise, even though it was an eclectic choice for collectors, but thought the new dress watch was nice. That's a good one to mention as well. And I would actually go ahead and categorize that as a winner move of theirs too. The 1908. Okay. Now, and I know I put out a video where I've compared it to the other. To me, it's a Calatrava style dress watch. So that's that Bauhaus-esque, not in the Nomos vein, but again, you take the Calatrava and you derive off of it. And that's where I think the Patrimony is. That's where I think the Saxonia is. And that's where I think the 1908 is. All with their own looks, though. Like they're not clones. They're their own thing. The Rolex look is nice. It's not in that type of watch category. It isn't what I would pick, but they've priced within range of all of their competitors. I remain confused as to whether that's going to do anything for them different than the Cellini did, because the only real advantage I know about it, and they had some really handsome Cellinis, is that it's thinner. It's notably thinner, which I think is good, but I don't know that was the Cellini's problem. So I'm still not sure that Rolex is going to break into the dress watch vein. Maybe they do, but it's a nice looking watch. Like the designers thought about it, and so in that regard, I would put it as a winning choice because I know some people have dismissed it as boring. I think they would dismiss any Calatrava style watch as boring. So this is not their type. It's just not their type of watch. I think the more fair question is, are they trying to diversify? Is this going to be a watch that you have to buy in order to, Longa, for example, is pretty famous about, if you want to start talking to them about buying an Odysseus, if you're buying from them, new, they want you to buy some of their dress watches first. And it shows because most of their dress watches are available on the secondhand market, thousands less than they are new, which is great for someone like me who likes the dress watches. But if you're wanting their steel, you have to go through their dress store. Rolex has never made you do that. At your AD, maybe you need to go and buy some Oyster Perpetuals and date just before you're allowed to go ahead and jump to the top of the list for a Daytona. But I don't know if this changes any of that, or if it's just they don't want to just do metal bracelet watches. I think maybe it's more the latter because I just don't see how they sell out of everything. That's another thing, how impacts sales. All of these releases aside, Rolex is going to basically sell out of everything anyway. So I just don't know if that's if Is there really a game changer for Rolex? I probably not, because they're winners no matter what, right? I mean, they're always they can't lose for trying. Maybe that changes someday, but I don't know when. So Cloudkin, welcome Cloud to the live stream, says it's due to a down watch market that Rolex tried to make the release big in order to jumpstart it again. It's interesting because I think a lot of other companies, one might argue, played it safe this year, safer, less avant-garde style decision making at Watches and Wonders compared to say 2022's Watches and Wonders, because they knew there was less money in the market available, and so they want to save on their design, save on their retooling, save on their production to try new things, and rather play it a little bit safer. But of course, Rolex is different than anyone else because they are the industry leader. DeRosa, welcome to the live stream. DeRosa says Cellini were too thick. 12.5 millimeter date, 13.5 millimeter moon phase. The new ones need to be under 10 millimeters, and they have significantly improved that thickness. So I mean, again, when I look at it, that's the big change that I saw, was that maybe there's better power reserve too and stuff, but it was the thinness that caught my eye, much more competitively thin. Now, against its rivals, it's in line. I mean, a Saxonia automatic is thinner, and a hand wine only patrimony is thinner. But again, of course, the automatic is a better apples to apples comparison. But I don't know if Rolex can really compete with Longa when it comes to movement design. I suppose it depends. Not, the early Longa movements weren't the most impressive things in the world, to be fair. Neff notes the 1908 looks super Germanic to me. It's okay. Not really my type of dress watch, too austere. And again, all of those things, I give credit to, and maybe I'm wrong to give credit to, but to me, my understanding is the Calatrava Pateks, and Patek is Swiss, but Calatrava sort of started all of this sort of Great Depression era. How do we get people to buy watches when the market has crashed and even rich people weren't as rich as they were? And my understanding is that design was taken some elements from the Bauhaus school, which was German. So that's probably why, even though I credit a Swiss company for that original look, it's kind of got some German roots, but not in that young house nomos, like pure like I almost think of those as pure true school of Bauhaus. And I actually don't like that look. I don't like Bauhaus style, but I do like the Calatrava. I do think the Calatrava is very attractive. And then DeRosa notes modern dress watches must have 1, an open case back, 2, be thin, 3, a clean dial, and 4, under 40 millimeters. And it's interesting because they don't all play by those rules. Vacheron's Patrimonies, I think they're up at 42 millimeters right now, at least some of them. Granted, they also have the biggest hit and are cheapest on the used market of any of the ones I've examined. Maybe the JLC Ultra Thins might be a little bit cheaper because they don't have the same cachet as a Holy Trinity brand, but it could be because of that size. Of course, people with larger wrists maybe want an exception, and perhaps Vacheron meets that need, whereas most of the others are playing by those rules. There was a time, I think, where people would have pushed back against the display case back, and I know that was a suspicion that I've seen at least one person levy against Rolex on the Platinum Daytona. Is like, oh yeah, of course you put in a sapphire case back. It saved you so much platinum that you actually are making more money off of that watch now because you took the more expensive metal and just threw in this couple $100 sapphire instead, which is an interesting point because dress watches, they would technically be worth more money if they were completely dripping in gold, including on the case back, instead of doing cheap sapphire. Sapphire is pretty cheap, but people like to see the movements, and I mean I do too. I want to see, especially when I'm spending that amount of money, I want it to be decorated. And I thought Rolex did a decent job decorating their movement. Neff is claiming possible credit for being the one to criticize the Platinum Daytona. It might have been you. I want to think maybe I saw someone on a video though also do it. So perhaps there's been more than one. Perhaps you are not alone. I think it's a fair point of critique. And in fact, I don't know if they still do it, but Patek at one point on display case backs did it pocket watch style, where you had a closed case back and it could clip open. It didn't make that sound, but let's pretend it didn't go. And then you would be able to look at the display case back. So it gave you both gold back, and then you'd open it, and then inside was the sapphire to see the movement. So, there is a way. If you want to prove that you're not trying to cheap out, you do the little girl birthday party thing, though. Why not both option? Okay, so those were the Rolex stuff. But then combined with Tudor, though that's obviously I'm referencing the live poll because I merged Rolex and Tudor. But for the purposes, of course, of me going through this mental exercise, we'll just pick one of the brands. But Tudor might, you know, I'm probably leaning towards picking them, even though I think for me the Rolex releases were more interesting. But so Tudor, in a way, played it safe, but also did what I think most of the watch buyers are going to be interested in. And part of that is, of course, Tudor is so much more approachable, affordable, that just more people can play in that pond than can play in the Rolex pond, especially because even if you have the money for the Rolex, it's the question of being able to get it at retail. But I mean, in terms of the moves they made, so obviously, Black Bay 54 is the big one, or the small one, if we want to talk about it. So on paper, it's not that interesting, right? We shrunk the Black Bay 58. Black Bay 58 was the shrinking of the Black Bay, and the Black Bay 54 is 2 millimeters off of the 58, which was 2 millimeters off of the off of the prior iteration. Apparently, I still have Discord. Um, so the it's like, okay, well, that is that it? But the reaction to it's been interesting. I mean, again, I've seen some people have been able to, because Tudor had them available at Watches and Wonders to buy. I think they tried to they try Tudor does this a lot. They try and launch reveal and then actually have their stores ready with them. So I've seen a number of people report back in, leave comments on some of my stuff and all of that about actually getting these watches or handling them. For some, they feel it's way too small, which I have handled. I owned a Black Bay, but it was a bronze, so that was even bigger than a normal Black Bay. But I have gone to one of my 80s, and I have handled the 58s, and I think they're very nicely sized. As dive watches, I would tend to lean them a little bigger anyway. So I think for a lot of people, the Black Bay 54 is probably too small, quite frankly. And they might not think it until they try it, but I think for some, I think they're going to find it's a little too vintage for a lot of people. But that being said, there are a lot of people with smaller wrists and who I think are really going to like a 37. I've had 37. I still have I think my two Mr. Jones watches are 37 millimeter. I would never want a dive watch that small. I don't think for me, but um, because to me that's dress watch size. But I definitely could see people who prefer smaller watches or have smaller wrists or don't have the same, no, they're more vintage inspired on their dive watch line. That 54 is really going to speak to them. When most of the debate is whether or not you're upset that the red triangle is gone, I, I by and large, I think that's a good sign that the watch itself was a winner. So that was a thing. I do want to touch on this item as well that DeRosa's noted. Tudor switching the black base to the Jubilee style bracelet is a pretty bold move. Really changes the feel. Not much of a tool watch vibe there now. It's very date justy. And that was another thing with that burgundy, so it's like, okay, well, then on the main Black Bay line, they come out with that burgundy dial, which has the new movement. I believe that's thinner than the older Black Bays as well, even though it's still a 41 millimeter watch. So that's good because I don't hear as many chonker complaints about Tudor as I do versus Omega and their coaxial movements, making all of their watches chonker watches, very thick watches. But it has been something that's come up on some of the Tudors, especially when they first introduced the in-house movements. So I thought that was good. But I also think DeRosa's point about the Jubilee, like if you're like me and you don't like the faux rivet look, the Jubilee all of a sudden just kind of gets you around that, even if you weren't necessarily going for a date just style look. And I think the Jubilee looks pretty nice on that watch. So that was a surprise. Again, I don't think it's a particularly shocking move. It's not bold per se, but it's very different in that, it's iterative, but iterative in a way that I think a lot of people just weren't thinking about when they came into Watches and Wonders to watch. So I think that was really, really interesting as well out of Tudor. Cloud says Tudor's better releases come throughout the year, but same issues with them exist in that every release has to be a business decision approved by Rolex. Yeah. And for me, there was a miss, the GMT watch in white dial. Maybe it's better in person, but the renders, photos online, I was not impressed with that color scheme. When I first read about it, I thought I was going to get vibes of a Rolex Explorer 2, which I love the Polar Dial Explorer 2. I own one. But just the way it works with the bezel for me doesn't work. And again, I've seen some other watch media folks. I think I saw one guy who said he really, really liked it. And another guy said, nope, it was the same thing. He thought he handled it at the show and he thought the dial was so flat. It just didn't work with how the rest of the watch is configured and that it wasn't nearly as good as the black. So for me, I've not seen a lot of people talk about that one overall. So it's definitely not been one that resonated like the 54 and the Burgundy bezel watches did. So, I mean, I guess if we want to kind of consider what did Tudor do that maybe wasn't the most impressive, there's that. Of course, something I didn't really talk about at all, but was pretty big was we talked about at the start of this live stream was the decision to get rid of the smiley dials and move in-house on all of the regular black bays, the non-dive black bays. Overall, I think it's a good move for them. I think some people will really lament it because the price points obviously moved up with those in-house movements, but the movements have they been around long enough? You know, I think they are. I think the power reserve gain is worth it for a lot of people. So and overall, while I kind of miss the smiley because I had a 1926 with the smiley and it was a cool kind of look. Overall, the specs are a lot better, and I get them moving away from that because it's a little weird the text saying self winding, but some people aren't going to like it. But the nice thing is there are plenty of used ones of the older version, so I don't think people are really going to be hurting for a long time. If you really want to get one of those, I think you'll still be able to get them quite affordably for a while. But over time, I wouldn't be surprised as they'll become more collectible. Would be my guess. Let's see some chat items. Neff is a fan of the Black Bay 54 and definitely wants to try one on. 39 would work for me, but the case shape and thinness on the 54 really do it for me. And thinness is not to be underestimated, I think. Again, it depends on how you wear your watch, but thickness has two issues. One is, of course, sleeves. Like if you're doing things with long sleeves and whether or not that becomes a problem for you. And that doesn't just mean like, wearing a dress shirt. It could be wearing a jacket. It just depends. Then the other thing, of course, is if the watch ends up getting like top heavy. I found, with thicker watches, how well is it balanced and wear on your wrist? Because that size also means how is the weight distributed within the case. And you can make a really thick watch and really distribute it quite well. I've heard some people comment on that. GMT was it the long jeans that came out a couple months ago. That's super thick. A lot of people were surprised at how thick it was. I think it's around 17 millimeters. Some people have said, though, that the weight wears really well on it. I still think it's too thick for me to even want to bother trying it on, but your mileage may vary. Speaking of mileage, Obese Tuna says you can't really do big watches. Derosa knows the dial diameter. The crystal measurement of the Black Bay 58 is 30.8, and on the 54 it's 29.2. It's a difference, but it's not a huge difference. So that's a good point to make. And Cloudkin says he tried on the 54 thin, but it did feel small. So yeah, it's definitely one probably where if I don't really think I'm in the market for, because next time I get to the AD, maybe I'll have them pull one out of a case just to let me try it, just so I could say I did. I really like the 58. Like I've really been inclined to get the silver cased one. I really like the look of it with that taupe dial. But I don't know, after getting this Pro Pilot X in gray, how many gray watches does Dennis have to own? I have a gray Omega Seamaster. That was another reason I almost didn't get this one because I was like, I bought the gray dial Omega Seamaster, and I'm like, how many gray dials do I need? I love the Seamaster gray dials so much. Omega does my favorite gray dials. I really like their Aquaterra in gray, and I've been tempted to get that too. And I thought it's the same exact color. At least this was a different color of gray, right? Where it's a problem, folks, when you're down to the point of choosing the shades of gray to claim you still have diversity. Because diversity is something I try and do in my collection. I say that. And then what do I practice what I preach? I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. But anyway, so I think Rolex and Tudor combined, in the live poll, very, very strong. And I lean towards naming one of those two as probably the company that won Watches and Wonders. But let's touch on a few others, other big ones that happened. Now, Cartier, I've seen them on a few lists. They were on one or maybe two of the three lists that I linked in the description for some of their watches. I thought it was relatively safe, though they still had a lot of watches that they showed, which is something that they tend to do. None of it really spoke to me this year. I think they revised their Tank American. That's probably the thing that interested me the most. They did have some high end. They had another like transparent Santos thing going on. The green Santos, though, that's probably a good highlight. It's a year too late, but for green, but the green Santos, I thought was really attractive, but not really revolutionary. I mean, I suppose is it any more or less revolutionary than the burgundy Tudor bezel? I'd say less actually, because I think all the other specifications on that Cartier were the same. Whereas the burgundy bezel, there were some other changes involved to the watch, and it wasn't just a bezel swap. So for me, Cartier, I don't really think they're in the running. See, Neff says the 16622 Yachtmaster with platinum dial is my favorite gray dial. I have a few and many gray straps. Works with everything. That's why I like gray. But you see, I have there are like 3 business suits I wear, and 2 of them are gray. They're different shades of gray, but they're gray because gray is my favorite color. As it's probably not surprising. I'm not even sure we can really call gray a color, but I do, and it's my favorite. And Neff says, a few gray watches, I mean, not the Yachtmaster. No, you could have a few Yachtmasters too, but maybe get them in different colors if you're doing that. We already talked a little bit about Chopard. I thought 2 very, very nice releases. Patek, they have that new Antarctique that came out. That's been a little polarizing. All the Antarctiques look very different from each other. I actually like the new one. Let's go ahead and load it up. It's very, very clean. Let me close these tabs. It's just price point wise. This one, the titanium dark sector. Oh, what? Why do you think I like it? I'll give you guys one guess. Don't guess the color though, because then you'd be right. That's probably why I like it. I'm starting to learn. This is like some sort of like watch therapy thing where I'm learning like I'm really boring when it comes to dials. I'm starting to realize I may have a problem with liking gray too much. But look how good it looks. It looks so good. My problem with it, though, is the price is like $10,000 on top of the other Antarctiques were. Granted, this is a 100-piece limited edition. I won't be buying it. But anyway, I liked it. I don't know why they strapped it to a tree. That's a little weird. But tree strapping decision aside, I really like it. I'd still pick Chopard over Patek in terms of winning watches and wonders, though. But I thought they had a nice looking watch. It has gotten some positive buzz, so I wanted to note that one. Yeah, there we go. Except has Corona ever done a gray dial? See, I've never bought one of theirs because they're doing things like salmon and baby blue and stuff. We have to have gray. That's what the people want, and by the people I mean Dennis. What Dennis wants. Let's see some other ones that have come up a bit now. I did not talk about this on the live stream we did recently when Jason from Design Atelier and Tony were on, and that is these new Igeneurs. I'm probably mispronouncing that, Igeneurs. So for those that aren't familiar, the Igeneur is a Gerald Genta design, and I guess there have been other versions that IWC has put out, but this one. It's interesting. So they put in a lot. I guess they really, again, I've not dived into a lot of this. This is me regurgitating what I've read and heard on some podcasts, others who have looked more into this than me. But like the IWC put in a lot of time to try and better execute on what the original like drawings were from Genta, which weren't really workable at the time. And so there are some adjustments. It's not totally, I guess, pure to the drawing, but in some ways it may be more authentic than what their other iterations were. Some people really love this look. Some people think this is one of his weaker designs, or there are elements to the design from Genta that make this weaker than his more famous and more storied models, which of course would be the Royal Oak and the Nautilus in particular. I do like that it feels different than those in the sense like, okay, so we don't have screws around the bezel. We've got like these bolts, but it's also it's not an octagon. It is round, so it doesn't really look to me like a Royal Oak or a Nautilus. It's also a little less interesting because of that, though. So it's one of those things. But and hey, respectably, thanks for tuning in. I do appreciate it, and have a good lunch. And But let me get the other chat here. I think I read Chopard is making like 10 pieces of the 1816 salmon dial a year. Try and get one. Oh, well. Yeah, you should try. It does look really good. I feel better about not going for it if I know it's basically impossible to get. And 10 would mean it's impossible to get for me. The big thing about this is it seems to me, and this is me generalizing, I think it's an attractive watch. Most of the commentary I've seen on the watch is that most people seem to like it. Maybe not love it, but a lot of people really like it. But what Neff has said in the chat says everything about what I have heard. If there is a loser of watches and wonders, it has been this watch. And so I disqualify IWC from being watch of the show simply because they priced this thing so obscenely high for what is in it, for what powers it, for what metal it is made out of. And I get that it took them a lot of time to get the design down, but I'm trying to think. It's probably Federico from Federico Talks Watches. I'm pretty sure this is where I'm stealing this line from one of his live streams where he said that you should be able to own two of them for the price that they're charging for this watch. And based off of the summary of the information that I've heard on it, I would concur. IWC has really missed the mark on the price point on this watch. And if you love it, obviously you need to make your own decision. I would recommend, even if you love it, to wait for it to go gray at the very least, or go in and negotiate a big discount because it's just not worth it. I don't know what they were thinking. I think they were thinking that they'll be able to say it's a Genta design and command cash. And when they were probably first working on this, in the height of the watch buying frenzy of the pandemic, they probably thought they could get away with it. The blowback on the price, though, has been so severe. I'm really wondering if they'll have no choice but to pivot on this watch within 12 months because I don't know. I mean, and DeRosa, yeah, it's a good point. The problem is that IWC will hold back the number availability. The gray market price will go up, and people think the MSRP isn't too high. I would say maybe. I agree with you, DeRosa, that it would not surprise me if that's what IWC's initial reaction will be. Given the time investment and everything, it is so hard for any company, outside of watches, any company, to ever actually cut price that I don't think they'll do it. I think they feel like they'd be losing face to do it, at least initially. So I think the desire would be to somehow try and make people feel like the price is worth it. And the short-term answer is yes, to throttle supply. The longer-term answer is you keep the same case design and then you do something new with the movement. And then you know how it is in this hobby. Everyone goes, oh, in-house, I guess the sky's the limit because and this is and everyone's different, but I'm going to even lump myself in. I don't understand all the nuances on movement development to necessarily be able to tell you that it is or isn't worth something just because it's in-house. But I'll tell you what, people definitely lose all sense of perspective when you tell them it's an in-house movement. Whereas there are plenty of folks who'll go, if you say it's a Solita, they'll never pay over $4,000 for that watch. So no matter what's done to that movement. So it's like I think we use it as a buzzword and we don't even really know what goes behind it. I remember a few months ago, I read about the Kickstarter Yema was doing to develop a micro rotor movement. But when I looked at it all, and then I looked online, and one of the Chinese movement makers, I don't remember, it was the Seagull factory. I think it was, might not have been though, had basically the same movement. It was like 0.1 millimeters thicker than what Yema said they were going to develop. But like the power reserve was comparable and everything else. And I was like, why are you doing an in-house move? It's so they think they can sell for more money is my assumptions that Yema's going to do an in-house. But I'm like, they're not bringing anything new to the table with that micro rotor movement that you couldn't already buy from another company. So why do it other than you think it makes you look better? Like compare that to Tudor in-house movement. And it's like, well, why do we have to pay more for a Tudor in-house movement? Well, Tudor's in-house movement's coming with like twice the power reserve of the Eddas they were using. So at least there's something tangible that I get out of it, right? And they're going to also go ahead and chronometer spec them. Most people may not care about that, but hey, it's something that they can point to that's you could measure it. So that's kind of where it is with that. So anyway, IWC, yeah, no, I mean, if you're desperate for one, obviously people are going to make whatever choice they have. But if they're sitting in store shelves, I just don't think, other than a few walk-in traffic, the watch nerds all know it's overpriced. So unless they love it above any and everything else that they might otherwise buy, it's going to sit. And the general public isn't like this isn't a storied model by IWC, right? If you're, let's say you were a common, let's say you weren't a watch nerd, right? And but you knew, somehow you knew IWC, like IWC was your favorite brand. If IWC is your favorite brand and you're not a watch nerd, it's most likely one of their pilot watches. And if it's not that, it's probably a Portuguese. Those are the two most popular models. And so I don't think it'll work out for them. I think that they'll eventually have to clear these out. You might have to wait a year. I think if I'm going to guess, why not? My YouTube, I'll guess. Uh, IWC puts in a new movement, keeps the same old price, but it's going to take at least a year to do it. And then they dump all these references on gray and get rid of them because they're not going to sell enough. Or they don't build very many in the first place because they already realize they made a mistake. And they'll use the movement as the argument to get the price up. So, but we'll see. DeRosa says, that's the issue. I don't mind IWC putting it at $12,000 or whatever, but just not for this. It needs a higher end movement or a micro rotor or hand finish or an open case back. This is a glorified Mark 20. And that's that. I agree. I think that's the problem. They can fix this over time. They can fix this. But currently as it, because the design looks good, but the rest of the elements for the price point make it a miss. And I think it's just gotten too exposed because of that. So they definitely didn't win Watches and Wonders. That's the point. JLC. Reverso gate, right? Reverso galore. That's really all they emphasized. Some very nice classic looking Reverso tributes. Of course, they always do Reverso tributes. The chronographs got a lot of buzz though. We talked about those on the last live stream that I hosted. A lot of, I mean, some people point out the tourbillons and stuff are really exciting sort of things, and they are. But again, we're getting into unobtainium pricing. Whereas like the tribute chronographs, yes, expensive. I think they're in the closer to the 30,000 price point, somewhere in the 20 to 30 range. But again, impressive. I think a lot of people were surprised to see that come out of JLC versus the tributes, which we knew were coming. So I really like the Reverso is sort of the thing. So in a way, I get tired of JLC just doing more Reversos, but they always look good. So I can't really hate on them. I don't know if it's strong enough to win. The chronograph, maybe, just because it's different. I think if you're not very different, you can't really quote unquote win Watches and Wonders over the other companies. But I was really impressed with how the watches look. And Neff notes, JLC kicked butt this year. I have to say that the Chrono Reverso is incredible, and I heard it is priced very fairly. I think the Chrono pricing is okay. From when I looked at it, given the new movement or the new complication and what all it is, yeah, it seemed okay. It's the Reversos overall, I'm less sure of because JLC has been doing like two price spikes a year on their watches lately. And I'm not sure that the tributes are fairly. I don't know. They don't feel obscenely priced, but I don't know. I still feel like they've gone a little bit above what inflation mandated they do, and I think that's because JLC's realized it's a classic design and that's working for them. And as DeRosa noted, JLC having nailed the Reverso category, what else should they do next? I mean, there's a lot that they probably, as watch nerds, we would probably say they should be doing. Like maybe the Polaris needs to be reworked again in order to try and make it more attractive because it just doesn't seem to get a lot of traction, right? I hear more people talking about Glashütte Original's dive watch than they do about something out of JLC. So, focusing on their dive stuff. There's a lot of the, what is it? The ultra thin master, their round dress watch line. They have some, I think, really attractive watches, but they just don't have the traction that the Reverso has. So maybe they do something there. I do think that they will continue to experiment. I wasn't surprised that they went really conservative this year because, again, with the watch market, all these companies were expecting reduced sale interest. So doubling down on what works makes a lot of sense for a company like JLC. But I also think they worry about being too much of just the Reverso company. I don't think they want to be like the Royal Oak company. So I'm going to guess they'll do more, and they're probably working on it behind the scenes, but I was in no way surprised that they stuck with just Reversos as their primary focus this go Back to the main brands. Oris, of course, got a lot of attention with the Kermit, but I can't say that they won watches and wonders with it because all it is essentially a new dial color with a collaboration. So they added $200 to the price point and stuck Kermit on the first of the month in the date window. A very attractive execution, a very nice watch. I like a lot about what Oris is doing, but there was nothing revolutionary there. Will note Neff has noted regarding JLC's Polaris definitely needs a refresh. That movement is way outdated in size and specs. Again, yeah, I don't know if that's the one they're going to touch next. I would like to see JLC try and do more in the sports watch line. I think it's more important that they diversify in that direction than to come up with a round dress watch because they have a rectangular dress. I know that the Reverso didn't start as dress watch. This is dress watch now, and it's plenty successful. So keep doing what they're doing with the Reversos. Don't worry so much about making Calatrava style watches, and figure out something on the sports watch line. So anyway, so Oris, not enough there. Panerai, that's not one. We did briefly talk about it on the live stream. Tony, who was a guest on that live stream, did bring it up. Again, I just don't feel there's enough different here to. I don't know. I have to confess though, I don't like Panerai watch look. Like I don't like the look. For me, I don't. It doesn't. It's not to me. It's not an appealing watch. So I have trouble seeing it. So it's out just simply because I don't like any of these designs. I never have. So for me, it just doesn't work. Parmigiani, I really like what they're doing with their Tonda line. The Parmigiani Fleurier, I like. This is the minute repeating Retropante. I don't really know why they came out with, let's set aside the minute repeater parts, but I don't really know why they're doing like Retropante when they did the GMT where they hide the GMT hand is super cool for travel time. I mean, this is basically the same idea, but to be used as a timer, which doesn't seem, it seems like a weird flex to do something that's basically using the same hand in a slightly different and less useful way. But I mean, if that's your thing, it's your thing. I really like the new Tonda just dial design way more than the old Parmigianis. I went back and looked at some of the older Parmigianis because they're readily available to used. And these new ones I don't really like these with the sub dials myself. I like the cleaner ones, like the time only or the minute one that looks good, or the old GMT one. But again, because the look is basically the same, even though they've done some neat stuff, I'm not going to put it as a winner overall, but I think the releases are really good. Parmigiani, I think, is on the right track. Can they finally overcome the fact that whenever anyone in America says their name, they're going to think about cheese? No. That's always going to be. That's like the Grand Seiko problem. In America, you're going to say Parmesan and you're going to stop and say, why is it a watch named after cheese? That's an American thing. So, Patek. Originally, when I was going to do the poll, I was going to have Patek up as one of your choices for winner. I've actually seen less people talking about the Patek releases. So it seems like the watch media isn't as impressed by these releases as maybe Patek was hoping. They had a number of drops though. And I don't know if anyone thought any of these necessarily quote unquote sucked. Like, were any of these bad? I don't really like this just because I don't like the way these are angled, the gondolo, but I've never liked that shape out of Patek anyway. But like this Calatrava, the 6007s, I like these. Like I like kind of the look. I've never been a big fan of their use of this non-color match date window on some of these Calatravas. So for me, while I like the rest of the dial, I don't know. It's sort of sporty for a Calatrava, isn't it? I mean, I think it is, but yeah, they're gold, but the carbon pattern I thought was kind of cool, but I don't think it's cool enough to bring anything for me. It doesn't bring anything to the table. So I was going to rule them out as just not being interesting, but not good enough. Let's see. DeRosa has noted back on JLC, Morgan Stanley 2022 report. They fell to number 14 despite probably selling lots of Reverso units. Must not be selling much else. And I wonder if part of that is, or I should say, how much of that is JLC, doing JLC things. And the other thing is we do have to remember, and per the poll here that I have up for you all, they are part of Richemont, right? And Richemont as a a collective, a cartel, a controlling group, however we want to think of them. They've got all these brands and they're perhaps issuing some edicts on what people are going to be focusing on. So, and that's part of the thing about like the discussion on the Polaris and if JLC is going to refresh the Polaris. Well, Richemont's got JLC and they're turning out reversos and reversos sell, and they've got Vacheron. They're trying to do whatever they're trying to do with the overseas out of Vacheron. And of course, the Igenier and IWC. IWC's Richemont. So they've got that going on. And then Panerai is all dive watches or dive inspired watches, depending which ones you look at. So, I mean, there's a lot kind of in this portfolio of stuff that Richemont might be like, JLC, this is your lane now. Like we've got all Langenzonen to do the super fancy chronograph slash dress watches that are weird in German. And Vacheron is, of course, Holy Trinity. And Cartier's doing, square watches. So, know your role. We've already got dive watches covered in Panerai, and IWC does whatever, I don't know. But we see that come up a lot when we talk about Swatch Group, right? Like, why are all the eggs like in the Omega basket, and then they put a few eggs in the Tissot basket and the Swatch basket, but like La Chute Originale ignored, Breguet ignored, Longines, I don't know. They get to do stuff, but they don't seem to have much advertising budget. It's weird. It's above my pay grade. I don't know. I don't know enough about the business to be able to really commentate much on that very well. So Obese Tuna has noted, I could imagine a JLC as anything other than a dress watch. Panerai has always been a non-starter for me. And also feels that the Calatrava should really be two-handed. I almost agree. I don't like central seconds Calatravas as a general rule, though, again, these more sporty looking ones make me question that. On the traditional dress watch roll, I do like the two-handed Calatrava, but I do think small seconds looks very attractive. So I personally would also back a small seconds Calatrava. And Cloud is noted the Calatrava pilots are great buy used. I've never priced those. I have priced the two-handers and the small seconds Calatravas, and they don't come down very much from their new price. At least the small seconds. You can usually find those used current models, maybe 1,000 to 2,000 less from a used store. If you go private seller, you probably get it even cheaper there. Koji has joined the live stream. Welcome, Koji. Says, I'm personally not a fan of the new sportier look of the Calatrava line, but it seems like they're trying to hook a younger generation. And I think you're right, Koji. Because otherwise I'm not quite sure what they're angling for here. I mean, if you're not doing it steel, that's not a sports watch, but they seem to be trying to get a little sporty with the dial. And I don't know if that's because like they have their Aquanauts and their Nautilus and they want those to be those lanes and, figure it out, but I'm not sure. And DeRosa noted that, liked the points I made about Richemont and the staying in your lane. I don't know what Richemont's doing. I should look more into Richemont. I think it's a little more clear with Swatch because it almost feels like a lot of those brands have very unique identities. Plus, with Swatch, we know the hierarchy. We know like Flick Flack and Swatch are at the bottom of the hierarchy, and they officially say like Breguet is the top. And then, you move on down and you have like Glashütte Original is ranked above Omega, and then Omega is higher than Longines, and Longines is higher than Tissot. But their advertising in no way aligns with that structure. And with Richemont, it's a little weirder to me because I don't know where they rank all of this stuff. So like Richemont has Montblanc, right? Well, Montblanc is kind of like a Seiko in that they've got like really low cost watches. And then they've got the Minerva factory stuff, which is super expensive. And they've got Piaget, which, okay, they were historically known for a lot of women's watches, but they do both. They've got Roger Dubuis. So that's high-end watches. But, so is Vacheron. So is Longa. And then you've got the more entry to high-end luxury stuff that can come out of JLC, Cartier, IWC. They've got the more entry-level options like tanks and single-sided reversos and pilot watches, but then they've got the expensive. It's just like I don't know what it is, other than like they're all luxury brands. I don't know what else is going on with Richemont. I can't figure it out. That being said, I haven't spent much time trying to figure it out either. So I like Nathan Duff's comment. Breguet needs way more eggs. Breguet is it's like Schmeagol from Lord of the Rings. It's a very sad story. You hear the sad story about Breguet. You think about how storied that brand is. You want to talk about a brand where you can find like everything that's in the catalog way less used or gray. Just look at Breguet. You got lots of options available. Holy cow. Very impressive work though, still on their watches. I've never found one that really clicked with me. I do actually have a one I do watch on Chrono. I watch their older iteration. I think it was the last generation marine ones with the big dates. I might take that out though because I do already have a big date watch at this point. But the marine watch, I always like the look of it. I just don't know like when I would wear it because it's kind of in that weird space. It's not really a sports watch. It's not really to me a dress watch either. I don't know what it is. It's a marine inspired watch. DeRosa says Patek 24-hour dial is really cool, but design looks a bit like a work in progress. The sportier ones are terrible. They look like tags. Okay. Well, I didn't get the same tag vibe, but I'll have to go and look at some tags and see if I agree with it. Neff says, I don't know what Patek was thinking with those new Calatravas, other than we need to just keep 20% of production in steel. Now, are those Calatravas in steel though? Or are they all white gold? See, that was one of the things I wasn't sure if they've gone into doing steel in the color. Let's load them back up real quick because I'm not sure. So what we were talking about, these 6007Gs, right? So there are 3 of those. And what does Watches and Wonders say? 3 new white gold versions. Okay, they're white gold. So you see, if they were steel, it would make more sense to me, that whole appeal to the younger audience thing that Koji mentioned, because a younger audience would be more likely to afford them. But then I wondered, well, if Nautilus is in steel, aren't Aquanauts also available in steel? So they've already got 2 steel lines, and I wondered if it's Patek's like, we don't want to do any more steel than we already do, because I don't know, they fear it cheapens the brand or whatnot. Koji asks, is it just a marketing issue with Breguet? That'd be interesting what people in the chat think. My answer would be no. I'm just bothered that if you list something at the top tier of your conglomerate of Swatch Group, that you don't seem to do any advertising for it. They probably do, but I don't see it. I'm just unaware. No, I think Breguet's biggest problem, that maybe in part could be solved by marketing, is what iconic watch do they have that people want right now? And you don't have to look it up. I'll tell you. The answer is none. Like, they don't got one. Like, if you say Omega, what are you going to think of? You thought of one or two things the moment I just now said Omega. You either thought of a Speedmaster, most likely a Moonwatch, or you thought of a Seamaster, most likely a 300M James Bond style version. That's just by saying the brand name. If I say Rolex, you probably instantly either thought of the Daytona or thought of a Submariner or thought of a Datejust. When I say Breguet, maybe you think of a pocket watch. It doesn't, at least for me, and again, I've been doing this for a few years now. When you tell me Breguet, I will think of a specific marine out watch they don't even make that model anymore of. And that's only because I've been looking at them. They just don't have a hit. They need a hit watch. Like where we're talking about like JLC wanting to diversify and Audemars Piguet needing to diversify away from Royal Oaks. Too many eggs in the Royal Oak basket. Breguet needs an egg. They need a golden goose egg, and then they need advertising eggs to get people into that watch. And currently, they feel like they're stuck in the past, and they make beautiful watches. And if you know, you know. And if you don't know, you don't care. And you have to want to know because Swatch ain't doing anything to tell you about it. So that's kind of where I am on it. Let's see. Neff says this is about Patek. They can't do them in steel and keep only 20% production in steel. We're going to the Calatravas. Obese Tuna says I can't imagine Patek doing a steel dress watch. Yeah, I don't think they want to cross that bridge. I don't think they need to. DeRosa says red and yellow second hands. I guess red is fast and yellow is exciting. Again, I'll put back up the share here. Yeah, I think it's just they're trying to be kind of modern, right? I'm sure someone probably in German said, or French said, these look modern. I think that word was probably said in their development. The Classique, I think is the most famous name of the Breguet line, but does the public know it? I mean, do most watch collectors? I don't think they do. But I could be wrong. I could always be wrong. Neff says, I think the tradition, my attainable grail at the moment. And Koji says, that's a good point, Dennis. I love the Breguet Classique, but I guess it's not an icon. I almost wonder, if it's more the case of it's more of a legend than it is an icon, right? Like it's a legendary watch, but is it iconic enough that I just don't think most of even the watch buying public, when you say Breguet, thinks of anything other than a vision of what a French guy in the past who made watches that that Napoleon wore, that's it at most. I just don't think they have anything right now. But they can always change that. And maybe they will at some point. But right now they have not. So okay, so Patek, yeah, okay, they had some stuff. I don't think it was anything that could win it for them. I Nothing stood out. We already talked about Rolex. Nothing huge stood out on the rest of it. We already talked about Tudor. All right, so few others to hit on real quick. We'd already talked about Zenith. We didn't really talk about Tag much. They had a few things on the Carrera, which I've heard some positive things, but again, I just don't think anything was revolutionary enough to really move the needle. I've heard more of, or seen more about this like fancy pants gym set one than anything else, but again, I don't think it actually moves that many units. It's they stuck a bunch of lab grown diamonds on it and bedazzled it. It's a bedazzled watch. It doesn't interest me. But people have been talking about it. Ulysse Nardon, they released a new version of the Freak. That's gotten a lot of positive attention. But again, it was really kind of one watch. I'm going to actually we didn't talk about it this time, but all Longdon Zone, the same thing. The Odysseus, I think for a lot of people, that Odysseus chronograph may be the watch of the show just because of how cool it is. But it was the only thing they brought. And so I don't think one watch wins it for you. I don't think you can win the show, as we're using the term. I think you can win the show with one watch. One watch might push you over the top, but I just don't think it does it. So kind of like Oris and the Kermit, it's just not enough. So I don't think they win. Vacheron, I think that'll be the one I want to end on. I talked a lot about this on the live stream. I already mentioned my favorite watch of the show was the Overseas Moonface Retrograde. We know the 34 millimeter self-winding also has gotten a lot of attention from people another overseas. The Patrimony Retrograde got a lot of buzz when we did the live stream with Jason from Design Atelier and Tony. This one, a lot of people pointed out as being really, really attractive. The retrogrades just seem to resonate really well. I've seen less watch media interest in what Vacheron put out than what my interest is. So, I lean towards saying no, they didn't win Watches and Wonders, but if I was to pick a personal favorite watch, it was that Overseas Retrograde, the blue one. Really, really liked it. So let's go ahead and see a few more of y'all's points. But I'm going to go ahead and end the brand, the poll. So the poll that was running, again, as a reminder for those that weren't watching live, I ran a poll to determine what the watch that wins as conglomerates was across these categories. And so I'm not surprised. The with 63% of the vote, the winner of that was the Rolex Tudor group. Richemont came in second at 27%. As a reminder, Richemont is JLC, IWC, Cartier, Piaget, and a number of others. And then the LVMH, no one picked LVMH, which I think at the show was just Hublot, Tag Heuer, and Zenith. And 9% said it was some other group that won. But before we pick our brand, just one brand, don't have to be a conglomerate. You can pick any company you want. If folks in the chat want to just start saying what they think won, now would be the time. I will go ahead and I will give it to Rolex. So let me say mine really quick. I'm torn because Tudor is in the end going to sell more watches. I think new watches out of this than maybe Rolex will, because of course Rolex is going to, so much of their catalog is stuff that isn't new to Watches and Wonders, and they're very, very limited supply. But Titanium Yachtmaster, colorful Oyster Perpetual, the bubble dot one, I think it's still going to do well. The puzzle piece watch, okay, yeah, I think that's a miss, other than it got them good buzz about them saying it's fun. I heard a theory that actually the reason they probably did that watch is so they would be able to better litigate against companies that make aftermarket dials that have been able to argue that Rolex, their fake aftermarket dial could never be confused for a Rolex dial because Rolex never does like fun dials, and this might be an example of them doing ridiculous stuff. I heard that as the theory. Obviously, the new Daytona line, I think by and large, the changes have been relatively positively received on that. They did have some new popular date just dial options as well. Plus, whether we want to consider it good or bad, the decision to discontinue the Milgauss got a lot of attention because that's making people already talk and think more about what Rolex is going to do if and when they bring that back. And I think it's a win, not an if. And the 1908. So getting rid of the Cellini line and bringing in a new dress watch, I think that was out of left field and surprised a lot of people. And well, I've seen a lot of people push back against it on Holy Trinity grounds, like other brands, and we'll throw Longa in as well, having very, very attractive competitive watches that can be had for less if you're willing to consider gray or used. A lot of people have pointed out Rolex is a better known brand. And so some people that might be looking for a dress watch might finally have the dress watch from Rolex that they'll be willing to buy it on. It's not a fatty like the Cellini was. So, it's a thinner watch now, reasonably thin size, a reasonable dress watch thickness at this point. So that's going to be my pick. Yes, the low-hanging, vanilla, boring fruit Rolex. But for once, they actually did interesting things, I think, especially for a brand that conservative at Watches and Wonders. So catching up on chat and then seeing what you all are picking. DeRosa noted Classique is looking dated, not an icon that stands the test of time, but one that didn't age well. I think a lot, Breguet, because Breguet's numerals are so pocket watch classic. Breguet hands are so classic. In fact, the hour hand on that 1908 Rolex is very Breguet looking. I'll be kind and say Breguet looking. You could also look at the hand and say that looks like the Mercedes hand from the Rolex, and they just punched out the Mercedes part and left it hollow. But I think it was a nod to the Breguet style. They didn't Breguet style the minute hand though, which I thought was weird. I think it was a little incongruous. I think that's part of why I don't like the 1908 as much as I like Calatrava or Patrimony or Saxonia. But yes, they have so much history at Breguet. Part of it might be them, it might not be Swatch Group, might be Breguet not being willing to modernize enough or move away enough from what they think is so iconic. But iconic at this stage is just not enough for them, in my opinion, if they want to increase sales. Neff says, De Bethune had a really cool release, a sort of hidden chronograph like ALS. De Bethune is a really interesting company. I've looked a little bit at them. The problem for me is the ones I've always seen. When you tell me De Bethune, I always think that Star Trek looking watch, which I don't like. So I immediately always think, oh yeah, they make weird, like Richard Mille weird watches. And I just immediately dismiss them, which is completely unfair of me. So I'm acknowledging my unfairness, but that's kind of where I'm always at when I hear about De Bethune. I haven't heard much about the new release. I'll have to look it up. I think I heard they had one, but I don't even know if I've seen a picture of it. Koji says, I love the VC Patrimony retrograde, but at 43 millimeters, yikes. And that's the thing with Vacheron's Patrimonies, though, right? They're kind of Calatrava-esque. They've got that minimalist look. They're all big. Like I think the small seconds, the time only small seconds one, that's a 42. It's a big watch. Now, that being said, I've known people with larger wrists, like 8.5-inch wrists, that go, oh, a dress watch I can wear. So there seems to be a market for that. But I don't know if it's a big market because like that small seconds iteration, that's like a $23,000-ish watch new. You can find them on Chrono for under 13. So, I mean, it takes a hit. It takes a bigger hit than Saxonias and Calatravas do. DeRosa says the Odysseus is cool, but again, it's unobtainable. And yeah, I should have noted it's only a run of 100. It's really cool. It's kind of like that. Let me finish the comment. The brand shouldn't hype models that literally can't be bought. And that's a fair point. That's another good enough reason not to allow them to win. It reminds me of a couple of years ago with Watches and Wonders. The first one I covered, when the JLC had that 4-sided reverso that like did everything. It was a $1.2 million watch, and I think it was limited to 12. Which, I mean, I don't even know why they had to limit it. At 1.2 million, how many are you really going to sell? I don't know. I think even rich watch collectors, there must be a line that they draw, and I think it's probably somewhere south of $1 million per watch. But maybe I'm wrong. What do I know? Let's see. Neff says that patrimony is absurdly huge for a dress watch. Cool if you can pull it off, though. And Koji notes, isn't that Odysseus Chrono over $175,000? I don't even, I don't recall that I ever even looked at the price from my end. Darosa may know, but and Darosa noted they make only one and sell it for a billion. They should make one and sell it for $1 billion. Yes, $1 billion. Well, that's not right. It was supposed to be a million, but we can't make that joke anymore because $1 million is nothing in the world of watches when it comes to high horology. Obese Student says the 1908, although it can't really compete with the best. Yep, but it's gotten attention. And Koji's noted he's interested in seeing the 1908 in person. I would like to as well. And that one might actually be in shops. I don't know. I haven't been to the Rolex dealer that we have in Kansas City. I think we have more than one, but the one nearest to me. I was last there November, I think, well before these releases. And I didn't even go to the Rolex counter. All I asked them is what was the wait time on a no date sub, and they were like, it's still about a year if you're in. I didn't ask to be put on a list. I've been looking more at thinking about maybe getting into a Blanc Pawn because I kind of like the Bathy Scaff, which is another watch that a lot of people don't like. I think they like the more traditional Blanc Pawn look. That's a bit big for me. Neff says, I do wish Breguet would use thicker lugs. That's the one complaint I have with them, the lugs. Yeah, it's always the lugs, isn't it? That ruin a watch. I'm trying to think if I has there ever been a watch where it was just the lugs that set me off? And for me, I don't think so. The weirdest reason, it's not really a weird reason when I explain it, but this one thing that ultra surprised me was I had that Ming Messina Lab collab and I got rid of that watch. And the reason I got rid of it was the crown. Every watch I've had, big watches, small watches. I had a Portuguese that was 44 millimeters. That's I have my Orient Cano, which is, I think that's 44 millimeters also. Maybe that's 43. Anyway, I've had watches that big. I've had watches as small as, not kind of rectangular watches, as small as 34 millimeters. I have never had a watch where I would reach into the pocket and the crown would gouge the back of my wrist and like leave a welt. That Ming did. I tried it. I wore it 4 different times. I changed the strap. Didn't matter. So I got rid of it. So yeah, I got rid of a watch over a crown, because it caused me pain. That was unacceptable, completely unacceptable. And Koji says, you live in KC? No way, my hometown. And in the suburbs. Since you know the area, I live in Olathe. So I'm on the Kansas side. But yes, Kansas City area. So let's see. Neff says, you will probably like the new Debitune Chrono. It's not hideous like the others. I meant to throw that on the screen. And yes, Neff, that is my one goal. Not hideous. That is all I strive to see with these eyes as they age. Just something not hideous. Gurosa says, I think the 1908 hour hand is intended to be Mercedes hand minimized. It actually makes sense. Cellini hands were not very Rolexy. And again, it fits their brand. I kind of would like to have seen, maybe it would look stupid, but I kind of would like to, maybe someone could render it. I tried to do a render once. It's actually, I've full disclosure, I've made the video private. It was my worst, it was my most downvoted video ever. It was still above 50%, but that's still pretty low from my channel, where my shorts often will be downvoted, but most of my videos are pretty positive. My first thoughts videos, if I do a hard take, like if I do a hard take on a Gerard Perregaux, I might be closer to the 80% mark on it. It was but the worst rated video I ever did was the one where I tried to mock up a render of an alternative to the Rolex Air King. Holy crap. Y'all hated it. Absolutely hated it. So I was just like, I still left it up. I took it down once because they have the new Air King, so it doesn't even make sense anymore that I had the video because it was the old reference I was mocking up off of, not the new one. So I finally took it down because I was like, I don't want to see any more downvotes on that video. Everyone was just like, yeah, I hate it. I was like, fair enough. And so they say that the Nomos has weird lugs. I don't like I haven't seen a Nomos that I like yet. So and maybe it is the lugs. The dials for me are what it is. But I didn't finish my thought. This is what happens when I get sidetracked by weird stories. So I'd like to see them do the Mercedes. I'd like to have seen the Cellini render or excuse me, the 1908 render with the Mercedes hand without lume. So it's hollow, but you see like the gold form the Mercedes in the circle. I've wondered if that would kind of look cool or it would just look like stupid. I don't know. I need to see it. 'Cause I'm kind of wondering if it kind of look kind of elegant, but maybe it looks dumb. I don't know. Does it look dumb? Maybe it looks dumb. Anyway, I thought it might look. It'd be more obvious that it was a their own hand style because that round end hollow that's very Breguet. Yeah, it's they don't have the pointer quite as long as to me a traditional Breguet hand though, so I could see where they weren't thinking it was looking too much like a Breguet style, but I don't know. Um, and Koji says Noma's lugs are quite large. Yes. And Koji has mentioned he went to Olathe South. Well, while I live in Olathe now, no one else besides you cares about this. uh, I went to Gardner Edgerton. So I grew up south of Olathe. I lived in the township. I actually live right across, not literally across the street, but very close to Olathe North. So I'm near the Mahaffey farmstead, which sometimes when I do videos, not at this late at night, but when I do videos during the day, I will have to do retakes because they do reenactments. Because for those, Mahaffey Farmstead is it's like an old timey, old west looking like Santa Fe Trail going out to Oregon thing, and they fire cannons and do like reenactments and stuff. So I sometimes have to do retakes because there'll be cannon fire, and I don't want there to be cannon fire on the YouTube videos because no one's going to know what's going on. They're going to think I'm under an artillery strike. And this is my favorite comment of the night, OB Studios. You say, your videos are always okay. And that's all I strive for, is merely okay. That's the goal. But speaking of okay, I will say, okay, I think we've gone long enough. We all agreed Rolex won Watches and Wonders. I'm sure their company is thrilled to know that they won the approval of the live stream chat and myself. I know Rolex hangs on my every word. So I'm glad that they can take comfort in knowing they did well. And we will look to Watches and Wonders 2024, where they will probably do less well and probably release another weird watch, at least on the Oyster Perpetual line. Maybe if they want to make a bunch of money, do a weird day date. And who knows, maybe give us a different dial color, maybe a white dial color on the 1908. We'll have to see. Anyway, I'll go ahead and stop it here. Thanks everyone who was able to tune in live. If you watched the recording, hopefully you didn't find it too meandering and enjoyed the discussion and looking at some of the photos from the Watches and Wonders site. And until next time, which will probably be the review on the ProPilot X Gray dial from Oris here in a few days, I'll talk to you on the next one. Take care, everybody.